The silence after the storm is a physical thing. It has weight and texture and a taste like cold metal. It is the absence of 70,000 voices, leaving only the hum of stadium lights and the distant, mechanical sigh of an emptying building. I have stood in that silence, not as a player whose fate is decided within it, but as a witness to the architects of that fate. This is not the story you hear on the broadcast. This is the story from the eye of the hurricane, from the locked door of an official's locker room long after the last camera has been shut off. The story of a whistle that has already been blown, a flag that has already been thrown, and the irrevocable reality that now hangs in the air, separating a city from its joy, a player from his legacy, a season from its destined conclusion. Imagine the final 2 minutes of a conference championship game. The air is not just tense. It is combustible, thick with the collective hope and dread of millions. A quarterback drops back. A blur of color and violence converges. The ball is released, and in the fractured second it hangs in the air. 1,000 possible futures exist. Then, a sound cuts through the din. Not the thud of a catch or the roar of a sack, but the sharp, piercing shriek of a whistle. A yellow flag spirals through the halogen glow. A tiny piece of cloth that lands with the force of a meteor. Everything stops. The future collapses from 1,000 paths to one. And in that moment, the most powerful men on the field are not the millionaire athletes or the iconic coaches. They are a group of men in stripes, their faces etched with concentration, their names unknown to most, tasked with the impossible, interpreting chaos at full speed and imposing order upon it. I have spoken to these men in the quiet after, to the referee who called a holding penalty that negated a game-winning touchdown. He described the walk back to the locker room not as a walk, but as a swim through a viscous, hostile atmosphere. He could feel the hatred emanating from the stands, a wave of pure, undiluted fury directed at the back of his head. He told me about the ritual of those next hours, the careful removal of the uniform, the striped shirt that felt suddenly like a target, the refusal to turn on his phone, which he knew was vibrating with a torrent of threats and obscenities. The way he would sit alone on the leather couch, the game film already queued up on a league-issued laptop, his heart still pounding from the adrenaline of the game, now mixed with a cold, creeping dread. He was about to judge his own judgment, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that the league office in New York was doing the same. This is the central, haunting paradox of professional football. We demand perfection from an element designed to be human. We build a $100 billion industry on a foundation of controlled violence and split-second strategy, and we place its integrity in the hands of a few individuals who must see the unseeable, judge the unjudgeable, and do so in real time under a microscope that magnifies every flicker of doubt. The whistle is not a marker of order. It is a detonator. It does not settle disputes. It ignites them. For the fan, a bad call is an outrage, a theft, a topic for talk radio and barroom arguments. For the official, it is a personal failure that gnaws at the soul, a ghost that will follow him into his dreams, and a professional mark that will be coldly catalogued in a performance review. For the player on the wrong side of it, it can be the defining, devastating pivot of an entire career. We remember the moments because they are scars on the collective memory of the sport. The tuck rule, the Fail Mary, the no call in New Orleans. These are not mere blunders. They are tectonic events that altered landscapes. They decided who went to the Super Bowl and who went home. They made dynasties and ended them. They transformed legacies. What I have learned, however, is that for every one of these infamous, league-altering cataclysms, there are 1,000 smaller, quieter fractures. A holding call on a routine second down run in the first quarter that changes a drive, that changes momentum, that changes a game no one will remember. A pass interference flag picked up, its meaning unexplained, leaving a defense confused and a coaching staff apoplectic. These are the silent edits to the narrative of a season, performed in real time by men we are told not to notice until they make a mistake. So we arrive at the precipice of the real questions, the ones that haunt the silent corridors of every NFL stadium long after the crowds have faded. What happens when this essential human element, fallible, pressured, vulnerable, collides with the inexorable financial machine of modern professional football? What is the true cost of that collision? Not in yards or points, but in credibility, in trust, in the very soul of a competition that demands to be believed in. Is the system built to support these men, or to sacrifice them? And when the flag flies, when the whistle shrills, cutting through the roar to change everything, can it ever be just a call? The game you love is built upon a foundation of trust. We trust that the boundaries are fair, the clock is accurate, and the rules, however complex, are applied with impartial precision. This trust is the invisible framework that holds the entire spectacle together. Without it, the touchdowns and the tackles, the heroic comebacks and the heartbreaking defeats, all collapse into meaningless theater. For decades, the National Football League has understood this fundamental truth. And so, they have constructed a system designed to project an image of infallible authority. The men in the striped shirts are the high priests of this orthodoxy, their whistles the sacred instruments of order. But what happens when the priesthood is human? What happens when the system designed to project perfection is, itself, riddled with the very fallibility it is meant to transcend? This documentary is an investigation into that fragile architecture. This is not about a few bad calls. This is about the ecosystem that produces them, protects them, and often fails to atone for them. We are pulling back the curtain on the most pressurized, scrutinized, and misunderstood operating system within the NFL's billion-dollar machine, the world of professional officiating. To understand the present, we must first understand how we arrived here. The origins of NFL officiating are humble, almost quaint. For most of the league's history, referees, umpires, and line judges were not employees of the NFL. They were part-time professionals. They were lawyers, teachers, and businessmen who spent their weekends flying to stadiums to administer a game that was growing faster and richer than anyone could have imagined. Their authority was rooted in tradition and a shared respect for the game. But as television contracts exploded and the financial stakes soared into the stratosphere, this amateur ethos collided with a professional reality. The game's speed and complexity surpassed the part-time model. In 2017, under immense pressure, the league transitioned to a full-time officiating corps for a select number of referees, a belated acknowledgement that the job had long since ceased to be a weekend hobby. Yet, this shift was less a revolution and more an adjustment, a patch on a system straining under its own weight. The rulebook itself is a testament to this strain. It is not a concise document of principles. It is a sprawling, living legal code, amended yearly in an attempt to govern an inherently chaotic sport. It currently spans over 100 pages of dense, often contradictory text. What is a catch? The league has rewritten its definition multiple times in the past decade, each attempt generating more confusion than clarity. The language governing pass interference, holding, and roughing the passer is built on subjective terms: significant hindrance, clearly and obviously, forcible contact. These are not binary judgments. They are interpretations, opinions formed in a blink of an eye. Former referee Jim Tunney once told me, "We're not judging intent, we're judging action." But the rulebook often asks us to infer one from the other, and that's where the ghost gets in. The ghost is the human element, the space between the written rule and the scene act. This space is where controversy is born. To manage this, the NFL built a fortress of silence. Officiating has been the league's most guarded internal function. On-field officials are prohibited from speaking publicly about specific calls without league authorization. Explanations are funneled through a single, often evasive, league spokesman. The detailed grading reports that evaluate every official on every play of every game are kept in a vault of confidentiality, seen only by the officials themselves and a handful of league executives. This secrecy was originally intended to protect officials from external pressure and to preserve the sanctity of their authority. But over time, it has cultivated a culture of opacity and unaccountability. When a mistake is made, the public sees no reckoning, no transparent process of correction. They see only silence. This silence does not protect credibility. It erodes it. It fuels the conspiracy theories and the fanatical distrust that now poisons every major controversy. Within this hidden world, a meticulous and relentless process of evaluation is constantly underway. Every Tuesday, officials receive their grades. Each call and each non-call is reviewed by senior officials in New York. A correct call earns a positive mark. A missed call or an incorrect flag is marked down. The system is precise, unforgiving, and profoundly isolating. Your mistakes are quantified, cataloged, and will determine whether you work a playoff game, a Super Bowl, or see your career quietly ended. Former umpire Chad Brown described it to me as living under a microscope. You're not just judged on the obvious game-changing calls, he said. You're judged on a routine spot in the first quarter, on whether you were in the perfect position on a sweep play. The pressure isn't just to not fail loudly. It's to be perfect, invisibly, on every single snap. This internal pressure cooker exists parallel to the external one, creating a level of psychological stress that few on the outside can comprehend. It is from this cauldron of pressure, complexity, and secrecy that our core investigation emerges. We will examine the immense psychological toll this profession extracts, a toll paid in anxiety, isolation, and sometimes threats of real violence. We will scrutinize the allegation of unconscious bias, not an orchestrated conspiracy, but the subtle human tendencies that might incline a crew to manage a blowout differently than a tight game, or the weight of a home crowd's roar on a borderline decision. We must, with clear eyes, confront the darkest specter, the potential for corruption, for the influence of the vast, legalized gambling industry that now entwines itself with the sport, and the league's frantic efforts to insulate its officials from this new and pervasive threat. Most crucially, we will audit the league's own handling of its mistakes. From the fractured communications during the replacement referee fiasco to the controversial one-year experiment with pass interference review, the NFL's solutions often appear reactive, clumsy, and distrustful of its own product and its own officials. The league demands that its arbiters be perfect, yet provides them with an imperfect rulebook and subjects them to an imperfect review process. It asks for public trust while operating in almost total secrecy. This is the essential contradiction at the heart of the modern NFL. Our journey will take us through 15 chapters, from the anatomy of a single whistle to the technological future that promises to replace it. We will sit with the men who have borne this weight, hear from the coaches and players whose lives were altered by a flag, and analyze the league's ongoing, fraught struggle to balance human judgment with the demand for robotic precision. We are embarking on an exploration of the fault lines in America's most popular sport. This is the story of the guardians of the game and the profound, often devastating consequences when that guardianship falters. The whistle has blown. The flag is in the air. It is time to trace its descent. The perception from the outside is one of monolithic authority. A group of men in identical stripes, a singular entity that dispenses justice. But step inside the ecosystem and you immediately see an intricate machine, a specialized unit where every cog has a precise function, and every function is designed to fail if any single part falters. This is not a group of referees. This is a crew. And the whistle is not a solitary instrument. It is the final output of a complex, real-time processing system. To understand how a call is made, you must first understand the organism that makes it. You must understand the anatomy of a whistle. A standard NFL officiating crew consists of 7 men. Each title is not just a formality. It is a strict job description, a sector of the field for which they are the ultimate authority. The referee wearing the white cap is the captain. He is the voice you hear over the public address system, the final arbitrator on rules discussions, and the overseer of the game's general flow. But he is not all-seeing. His primary focus is on the quarterback and the action around him. The umpire positions himself in the defensive backfield, a dangerous vantage point that gives him the best view of the interior line play, of hands fighting in the trench warfare where holding is constant and subtle. The down judge and line judge flank the lines of scrimmage on opposite sides. They are the guardians of the line, ruling on offsides, false starts, and monitoring the complex choreography of eligible receivers. The field judge and side judge are the deep sentinels, responsible for the secondary, for pass interference downfield, for catches and incompletions along the boundaries. The back judge patrols the middle of the field, another set of eyes on the passing game and on player conduct away from the ball. They do not simply watch the game. They scan their specific sectors with a trained, systematic methodology. A former side judge described it to me as reading the field in layers. You are not watching the ball. You are watching your area. You are tracking the wide receiver's release off the line, the cornerback's hand placement, the feet of a potential pass catcher near the sideline, all while maintaining peripheral awareness of where the ball is in relation to your zone. It is a form of situational hyper-awareness that must be maintained for 60 minutes of game time and for 3 hours of real time. The physical demand is staggering. These are not young athletes, yet they must sprint with receivers, backpedal with defensive backs, and constantly reposition themselves to maintain sight lines through a forest of massive, moving bodies. They are, in essence, professional witnesses, and their credibility depends on their ability to be in the right place at the right time, every time. The path to this pressure is long and exclusionary. There is no direct pipeline from college football. The NFL's officiating roster is drawn from a tiny, insular feeder system, major college football conferences. Scouts evaluate college officials just as they evaluate players, looking for presence, decision-making speed, and mechanical accuracy. Those selected enter a protracted apprenticeship. They might spend years working NFL preseason games, training camps, and in the league's endless library of film before ever being considered for a full-time roster spot. The training is relentless. During the season, Tuesdays and Wednesdays are dedicated to film study. The league sends out a training tape every week, highlighting specific plays from around the league that illustrate points of emphasis, correct calls, and missed interpretations. The crew then conducts its own conference call, breaking down every play from their previous game, a forensic review of their own performance. This is where the grading from New York is dissected. Every official must explain his thought process on every contested play. It is a peer review process that is both collaborative and brutally candid. This rigorous preparation leads us to the central philosophical tension within the profession, the dichotomy between rule enforcement and game management. The rule book is the law, but the game is not a courtroom. It is an emotional, volatile, and continuous event. The concept of game management is the unofficial, yet deeply ingrained practice of officiating with a feel for the contest's temperature. It is the understanding that calling every single technical hold on every single play would grind the game to a halt. It is the idea that a crew's personality and communication with players and coaches can prevent escalation. A veteran referee told me, "Your job is to be a steward of the game, not just an enforcer of a code. That means knowing when to explain, when to warn, and when to assert. It means understanding that a game in the first quarter has a different rhythm than a game in the final 2 minutes. But this philosophy is a double-edged sword. It introduces variance. It means that the line for what constitutes a penalty is not a fixed, visible bar, but a fluid threshold that can change based on time, score, and even the perceived temperament of the teams. This variance is the seed of inconsistency, and inconsistency is the root of fan and player frustration. It leads to the perpetual, anguished cry from the sidelines and living rooms, "Just call it the same way both ways." All of this preparation, this specialization, this philosophical balancing act, must then confront the immutable, overwhelming reality of the game itself, its speed. The average NFL play lasts roughly 4 seconds. In that time, 22 world-class athletes execute a designed, violent plan. The offensive tackle's hands slide inside the defensive end's jersey for a fraction of a second. The receiver and cornerback become entangled at the top of a route, each fighting for leverage. The running guard pulls and clips a linebacker on the edge of the vision of an official who is also tracking a play-action fake. The human eye, even one trained for decades, has physiological limits. The brain must process a series of high-speed events, cross-reference them against a mental rulebook, and make a decision often before the play is even fully concluded. There is a term for this in cognitive science: inattentional blindness. It is the phenomenon of failing to perceive something fully visible because your attention is engaged on another task. When you are the back judge, tasked with watching the tight end's route in the middle of the field, you may be literally blind to a hold at the line of scrimmage, not because you are negligent, but because you are human. So the whistle, that sharp sound of authority, is not the beginning of a process. It is the end point, It is the culmination of a lifetime of training, a week of preparation, a crew's coordinated effort, a philosophical stance, and a single human brain attempting to capture and judge a blur of perfection. And it is at this moment, in the collision between superhuman athleticism and human limitation, that the first crack in the system's facade can appear. For when the speed of the game outpaces the speed of perception, the official must sometimes rely on something beyond sight. He must rely on inference, on instinct, on a best guess. And sometimes, in the most critical moments, that guess becomes history. It can redefine a franchise, as it did one frigid January night in New England, when a blur of a play and an arcane rule converged to launch a dynasty and forever alter the meaning of a single word, tuck. There is a moment in every sport where history hangs suspended, balanced on a knife's edge, before being shoved decisively toward one destined path or another. In the NFL, these moments are often violent and athletic. A tackle at the 1-yard line, a fingertip catch in the end zone. But on the night of January 19, 2002, at Foxborough Stadium, with a blizzard swirling and an empire waiting to be born, history was decided not by a tackle or a catch, but by a paragraph. It was decided by an interpretation. It was decided in the shadow of a rule so obscure, so counterintuitive, that its invocation felt less like jurisprudence and more like alchemy. This is the story of the tuck rule, a moment that exposes the profound power of officiating to do more than manage a game, to manufacture destiny. The setting was primordial football, the AFC divisional playoff between the Oakland Raiders and the New England Patriots. A freezing wind, driving snow, a battered, hard-nosed Patriots team led by a young, sixth-round quarterback named Tom Brady, facing the veteran, intimidating Raiders defense. With less than 2 minutes to play and the Patriots trailing 13-10, Brady dropped back to pass. Raiders cornerback Charles Woodson blitzed off the edge, hitting Brady's arm. The ball came loose. The stadium froze. Raiders linebacker Greg Biekert fell on the football. The Oakland sideline erupted. The game, it seemed, was over. The Raiders had forced a fumble. They would kneel out the clock, advance to the AFC Championship, and end the Cinderella story of the young Brady. On the field, the celebration was immediate and visceral. It was a conclusion written in the mud and the snow. But amidst the chaos, there was a hesitation, a discussion. The officials were converging. Referee Walt Coleman, a veteran with a calm demeanor, was moving toward the replay monitor. The fumble was not a certainty. It was now a question. The rule in question was Rule 3, Section 22, Article 2, Note 2. It stated, when a player is holding the ball to pass it forward, any intentional forward movement of his arm starts a forward pass, even if the player loses possession of the ball, as he is attempting to tuck it back toward his body. In simpler terms, if a quarterback begins a passing motion, even if he is in the process of pulling the ball back to his body, tucking it and loses it, it is an incomplete pass, not a fumble. It is a rule designed to protect quarterbacks, born from a 1999 game involving the Patriots and Jets, but it existed in the netherworld of NFL legality, unknown to most fans and, as it seemed in that moment, to many players. Walt Coleman, under the hood of the replay monitor, was not looking to see if Brady's arm was moving forward. That was clear. He was tasked with determining intent. Was Brady still in a passing motion, or had that motion ended, and was he now securing the ball? In the grainy, snow-flecked replay, Brady's arm was indeed coming forward when Woodson hit him. The ball came loose as his arm continued forward, then back. Coleman emerged from the monitor and made the announcement that would echo for decades. After reviewing the play, the quarterback's arm was going forward. It is an incomplete pass. The seismic shift was instantaneous. The Raiders' celebration was amputated mid-roar, replaced by a disbelieving fury. The Patriots, handed a resurrection, retained possession. A few plays later, Adam Vinatieri would kick a 45-yard field goal through the gale to tie the game, and then win it in overtime. The Patriots advanced. They would win the Super Bowl that year, and they would win 5 more in the ensuing years. The tuck rule game is not merely a controversial call. It is the foundational myth of the greatest dynasty in NFL history. It is the singular, officiating made moment without which the entire architecture of the next 2 decades of football looks profoundly different. Tom Brady's legacy, built on a mountain of later achievements, nevertheless has this frozen, chaotic, legally debated instant as its catalyst. As Brady himself later reflected, everything was different after that game. Everything. For the Oakland Raiders, the moment is a ghost that never left. It is the definitive what if. What if the call had stood as a fumble? The Raiders were the better team that day. They would have hosted the AFC Championship game. The trajectory of their franchise, which slid into years of dysfunction afterward, might have been altered. For their fans and players, the tuck rule is not a rule. It is a theft. It is proof of a bias, a league preference for an emerging narrative over a veteran team's deserved victory. The late Raiders owner Al Davis never forgave it, seeing it as a personal betrayal by a league he often fought. The emotional truth for Raiders Nation is absolute. They won that game. The officiating record books say otherwise. The legacy of the tuck rule extends beyond 2 franchises. It exposed the dangerous power of arcane language in the rulebook. It highlighted how a clause designed for clarity could instead create profound ambiguity when applied to the split-second reality of the game. The call was, by the strictest letter of a poorly understood law, arguably correct. But was it right? Did it match the intuitive understanding of the game held by everyone watching? The rule defied football logic, where a quarterback pulling the ball back to his body is no longer passing. He is protecting. It created a universe where the outcome of a playoff game hinged on a semantic distinction between a forward passing motion and a tucking motion, a distinction invisible to the naked eye in real time. The league finally repealed the tuck rule in 2013, a tacit admission of its absurdity, but the historical damage or grace, depending on your allegiance, was irrevocable. This moment stands as the ultimate case study in the officiating's power to redirect history. Proves that a call is never just a call. It is a narrative intervention. It demonstrates that officials are not merely adjudicators of play. They are, at times, the authors of legacy. The tuck rule game handed the pen to Walt Coleman, and he wrote a first chapter for a dynasty and a last chapter for a rival's hopes. It cemented the idea that in the NFL, the most important play might not be made by a player, but by a man in a striped shirt interpreting a footnote. It forced every fan, every coach, every executive to confront a terrifying reality. That the immense effort, the brutal physical sacrifice, the years of strategy, could all be rendered moot by the application of an obscure paragraph. And it set a precedent for the scrutiny that was to come. If a call could birth a dynasty, what could a series of calls do? The league would soon find out, not in the freezing cold of a playoff game, but in the searing heat of national ridicule. The arrogance of any institution is revealed not in its strengths, but in what it believes it can do without. For decades, the National Football League had cultivated the authority of its officials as a sacred pillar of the game. But in the summer of 2012, during a labor dispute with the NFL Referees Association, the league's owners made a calculated gamble. They believed the pillar was decorative. They believed the men inside the stripes were interchangeable parts, that their expertise was a commodity, and that the machine would function just fine with cheaper cogs. What followed was not a labor dispute. It was a 3-week-long unveiling. It was a demonstration, performed on the national stage, of everything the NFL had gotten wrong about the delicate, impossible art of officiating. It was the experiment that exposed the machine's beating heart and proved, catastrophically, that you could not replace it with a cheap imitation. The lockout was, on paper, about economics. The league wanted to move officials from a fixed benefit pension plan to a 401k style system, and to create a larger, more flexible pool of lower-paid officials to increase so-called performance accountability. The veteran referees saw it as a devaluation of their profession and a threat to their long-term security. The negotiations stalled. The league, confident in its own mythology, proceeded with its contingency plan. Replacement officials. They were drawn from the lower ranks of college football, from the Lingerie Football League, from high school fields and semi-retirement. They were given crash courses in the NFL's Byzantine rulebook. They were given the stripes, and they were thrown into the fire of the preseason. The initial signs of trouble were dismissed as growing pains. But when the regular season began, the growing pains became systemic convulsions. The first 3 weeks of the 2012 season descended into a slow-motion farce. Games lost all rhythm, devolving into protracted, penalty-strewn slogs. The replacements, utterly unprepared for the speed and complexity of the NFL, defaulted to 2 modes. Either a paralysis of indecision, where crews would huddle for minutes to untangle simple rulings, or a panic of overcompensation, throwing flags on every minor infraction in a desperate attempt to assert control. The uncertainty was toxic. Players and coaches, realizing the officials were in over their heads, began testing boundaries, instigating confrontations, and manipulating the chaos. The veneer of authority evaporated. Baltimore Ravens coach John Harbaugh was fined for making contact with an official while arguing a call, a moment of physical disrespect previously unthinkable. New England Patriots coach Bill Belichick, in a rare public display of fury, chased an officiating crew off the field at the end of a loss, grabbing at the referee's arm. The game was becoming lawless. The pressure was a kettle screaming on every stove in America. It was only a matter of time before the lid blew off. It blew off on a Monday night in Seattle, September 24, 2012. The Green Bay Packers, a flagship franchise, were in town to face the Seahawks. In a tight, defensive struggle, the game came down to a final play. A Hail Mary pass from Seattle's rookie quarterback Russell Wilson into a scrum of bodies in the end zone. What happened next was captured in a single, indelible, and perfectly ambiguous image. Seattle receiver Golden Tate and Green Bay safety M.D. Jennings leaped for the ball. They descended together, wrestling for possession. 2 replacement officials stationed in the end zone faced a moment of absolute crisis. One, the side judge, signaled touchdown immediately, emphatically. The other, the back judge, appeared to signal for a stoppage of play, perhaps for an interception. They contradicted each other in real time on national television. The ensuing review under the hopelessly outmatched replacement replay official was a travesty of process. The rule for a simultaneous catch states it goes to the offensive player. But this was not a simultaneous catch. Every clear angle showed Jennings securing the ball against his chest, with Tate's hands clawing at it. It was an interception. It was a game-ending play for Green Bay. But in the fog of indecision and incompetence, the ruling on the field, the fractured, contradictory ruling, stood. Touchdown, Seattle. The game was over. The Fail Mary, as it was instantly christened, was more than a bad call. It was a complete systems failure. It was the graphic, undeniable proof that the NFL had lost control of its own product. The reaction was instantaneous and volcanic. It transcended sports. It became a national talking point about competence and integrity. Green Bay quarterback Aaron Rodgers, in a post-game interview that was a masterpiece of seething, articulate fury, dissected the officiating with cold, surgical precision. It was awful. Just look at the replay, and then the fact that it was reviewed. It was awful. The Players' Union, which had remained mostly silent, now issued a public letter demanding the return of the real officials, stating the game's integrity was impaired. Sports media and late-night talk shows feasted on the absurdity. The league office, for the first time, had no defensive bulwark. There was no process to hide behind, no veteran official's judgment to defer to. They had chosen this. They owned this. The following Tuesday, the NFL capitulated. A new deal was struck with the Referees Association. The locked-out officials returned to work for the following Thursday night game. Their entrance onto the field in Baltimore was met with a standing ovation from fans, a surreal and humiliating moment for the league. The referees had become heroic figures simply for being competent. The league's gamble had backfired in the most profound way possible. It had not proven the officials were dispensable. It had proven they were essential. It had not demonstrated the league's strength. It had exposed a stunning, self-inflicted vulnerability. The legacy of the replacement referee fiasco is permanent. It was a controlled experiment in removing expertise, and the result was chaos. It taught every fan that the smooth operation of a game is not a given. It is a high-wire act performed by professionals whose skill is rendered invisible only when executed perfectly. It revealed that the authority of the official is a fragile consensus, easily shattered by doubt. And for the league, it was the most expensive public relations lesson in its history. It forced them to confront the uncomfortable truth that the men they had treated as disposable laborers were, in fact, the guardians of the trust upon which their entire enterprise depended. But if the league was now forced to acknowledge the value of its officials, it still maintained an iron grip on how they were managed, evaluated, and, when necessary, silenced. The referees were back, but they returned to a fortress whose inner workings remained more secretive than ever. A command center in New York where their every move was now watched, graded, and judged with even greater intensity. There is a room, high above the clamor of the stadiums, where every whistle is dissected, every flag is weighed, and every judgment is, itself, judged. It is not a stadium box. It is a command center. It is a suite of offices and screening rooms at 345 Park Avenue in New York City, the headquarters of the National Football League. Here, the echoes of Sunday's chaos are transformed into cold, clinical data. Here, the men who wield the whistles on the field are themselves held to a silent, uncompromising account. This is where the league's officiating department, led by its senior vice president, operates as the ultimate auditor. This batch is about the weight of New York, the invisible hand that guides, grades, and ultimately governs the men in stripes. It is an exploration of who judges the judges, and the profound consequences of that judgment being rendered in secret. The process begins before the final gun sounds on Sunday. In every stadium, a league observer, a former official, sits in the press box, taking detailed notes on the crew's performance. But the true reckoning comes on Monday. Every play of every game is uploaded to a central server. A team of former officials and analysts, the senior staff in New York, begins the painstaking frame-by-frame review. They are not looking for effort or intent. They are grading for accuracy. Each official on the field is graded on every play that occurs in his area of responsibility. Did he make the correct call? Did he miss a call he should have made? Was he in the proper position to see the play? The grading system is a precise and notoriously strict percentage scale. Perfection is the unattainable standard. A grade in the high 90s is considered elite. Anything below a certain threshold, a number the league guards fiercely, can mean being benched or worse, your career quietly ending. There are no public reprimands. There is only a private phone call, a ranking that drops, and the silent, terrifying understanding that you are now on the list of the unreliable. This system creates a second shadow game happening in parallel to the one on the field. Officials are not just competing against the speed of the play. They are competing against the forensic slow-motion analysis of their every glance. A former field judge described the anxiety to me. You're on the field, and a play breaks to the opposite side. Your instinct is to turn and watch the runner, the excitement. But you fight that instinct because you know New York is watching you. They're asking, did he maintain his key? Did he watch his receiver on the backside? Even though the play went away, you're officiating for two audiences, the stadium and the all-seeing eye in the sky. And the eye in the sky never blinks. This relentless scrutiny breeds a specific kind of pressure, one that can paradoxically lead to more mistakes. The fear of missing a minor, technical foul can cause an official to throw a flag on a borderline play, preferring the sin of commission to the sin of omission in New York's ledger. The league's primary tool for managing public perception of this secretive process is a weekly video series called Official Review. Hosted by the senior vice president of officiating, it is a tightly controlled release of information. Each week, a handful of controversial plays from around the league are selected, and the league's interpretation is presented as definitive. The narration is calm, authoritative, and employs the slow-motion replay and telestrator circles that convey a sense of scientific certainty. Here, you can see the defender's hand on the receiver's hip before the ball arrives, which constitutes a restriction. This is correctly called defensive holding. The presentation is masterful in its construction. It gives the public a feeling of transparency, a sense that the league is openly addressing its mistakes. But it is a curated transparency. The videos almost never feature the most egregious, game-altering errors. They focus on nuanced plays that allow for instructive explanation. They are a public relations tool designed to reinforce the league's authority and to subtly educate fans on the complexity of the rules. They are not a true window into the grading room. They are a carefully staged view from its doorway. The private communication with crews is where the real accountability and often the real psychological toll is exacted. Every Tuesday, officials receive their grading report and a confidential video edit of every play they were involved in, marked with commentary from New York. Then, the crew conducts a conference call with their assigned supervisor, a former official who works for the league. These calls can be brutal. They are not therapy sessions, one retired referee told me. They are dissections. You have to explain your sightline, your thought process. And when you're wrong, they tell you in clear, unemotional terms. You missed this. Your positioning was poor here. This is a downgrade. There is no arguing. You listen. You absorb. It is the loneliest part of the job because it's just you and your mistakes, with a voice from New York confirming every one of them. This system, for all its intent to create uniformity and accuracy, can also breed conformity and fear. The desire to avoid the dreaded downgrade can discourage the kind of instinctual game-aware judgment that the best officials possess. It can create robotic officiating, where the letter of the law is followed into absurdity, for fear of the Monday morning review. The central, unresolved tension of the weight of New York is this. It is a system of accountability that is itself profoundly unaccountable to the public. The fans see a controversial call. The league, through its official review or a terse statement, might eventually say it was correct or incorrect. But they never see the consequence. Was the official downgraded? Was he removed from a primetime game? Will he work the playoffs? The league's position is that this secrecy protects officials from undue public pressure. But it also protects the league from having to publicly admit the full scale and frequency of error. It turns mistakes into internal administrative matters, rather than open questions of competence. This opacity fuels the conspiracy theories and the deep-seated distrust. If the judges are judged in a closed room, how can we trust the judgment? So we are left with a paradox. The league has constructed the most sophisticated, intensive officiating evaluation system in sports. It is a system designed to chase perfection. Yet, by operating in total secrecy, it undermines the very credibility it seeks to enforce. It asks for public trust while demonstrating a fundamental distrust of the public's ability to handle the truth about human error. The men on the field carry the weight of New York in their minds every Sunday, and the public is left carrying the weight of doubt. This dynamic creates a fertile ground for the sport's most volatile and subjective penalty, one where interpretation is everything, consistency is a myth, and every thrown flag feels like an act of faith or a declaration of war. It is the penalty that defines modern passing football, and it is the next frontier in our understanding of the whistle's power. There is no penalty in football that carries the same combination of sheer yardage, subjective interpretation, and emotional whiplash. It is a seismic event. It can turn a desperate third down heave into an automatic first down at the spot of the foul, a gift of 50, 60, sometimes 70 yards. It can rescue a dying drive or assassinate a critical stop. It is the ultimate leverage play, and its definition exists not in the clear lines of a boundary, but in the fog of human interaction. This is the pass interference gauntlet, the most potent and controversial judgment call in the sport. It is a rule that attempts to legislate a duel of bodies in motion, a dance of aggression and evasion happening at full speed, and in doing so, it exposes the very heart of officiating's impossible task. To understand pass interference is to understand that football is not always a game of black and white, but of endless, debatable shades of gray. The rule's evolution tells a story of the league's shifting priorities. In the early decades, defensive backs could mug receivers down the field. Contact was not just allowed, it was a badge of honor. The Mel Blount rule in 1978, limiting contact beyond 5 yards from the line of scrimmage, was the first major intervention, a move to unleash the passing game. But it created the monster we live with today. The modern rule is a labyrinth of clauses. It prohibits acts that significantly hinder an opponent's opportunity to make a catch. It lists examples. playing through the back, hooking, cutting off, pinning, veering into. The language is inherently interpretive. What is significant hindrance? When does hand fighting become a restriction? When does a defender playing the ball become incidental contact? There is no calibration device. There is only the official's eye, his instinct, and his willingness to throw a flag that will instantly enrage half the stadium and alter the geometry of the game. For the players on the field, every deep pass is a high-stakes gamble played out in milliseconds. For the defensive back, it is a constant, terrifying calculation. You are taught to never turn your head, to locate the ball, to play through the receiver's hands. But in practice, you are also taught to disrupt the route. You hand-check, you ride the hip, you use the boundary as an extra defender. You exist in the margins of the rule. A veteran cornerback described the mentality to me. It's a poker game every snap. You're seeing how much the ref will let you get away with early. A little tug here, a hand on the waist there. If he doesn't call it, you push a little more. But you're always one play away from the casino owning your soul. You make a perfect play, you're step for step, you turn and find the ball, and you and the receiver bang shoulders going for it. In your mind, it's clean. In the back judge's mind, from 30 yards away, maybe you impeded him. That's it. 40-yard penalty. Your coach is screaming. Your fans hate you. And the only thing you can think is, what did I do wrong? The answer is, maybe nothing. Or maybe everything. For the wide receiver, calculus is one of invitation and exaggeration. The art of drawing the flag is a practice skill. A subtle armbar from a defender becomes a dramatic flail. A slight jersey tug is met with an exaggerated head snap, a signal to the official that contact has occurred. They are taught to sell the foul because they know the benefit of the doubt in today's offensive league often tilts in their favor. A Hall of Fame receiver put it bluntly, it's part of the job. You create the illusion of a foul. You make the contact look worse than it is, because you know that if it's a 50-50 ball and there's any kind of entanglement, that flag is probably coming. And if it doesn't, you let the official hear about it. You let the world see your outrage. This theatrical element further corrupts the official's judgment. He is not just judging contact. He is judging performance, trying to discern truth from artifice in a collision of bodies. For the official, particularly the deep wing officials, the side judge and field judge, pass interference is the pinnacle of pressure. They must track two athletes, judge their interplay, determine the location of the football, and decide if the contact was permissible or a foul, all while sprinting to keep up. There is no more thankless task. Throw the flag and you are deciding the game. Swallow the whistle and you are deciding the game. The league's internal grading compounds this. A missed PI is a catastrophic downgrade. A called PI that is deemed incorrect on review is similarly damaging. This leads to what officials privately call the prevent defense mentality. When in doubt, throw the flag. It is safer, from a career preservation standpoint, to call the penalty and let New York sort it out on Tuesday than to miss one and be marked down. This institutional bias toward throwing the flag has undeniably changed defensive strategy. The era of the physical, shutdown cornerback has faded, replaced by a generation of defenders who play with a palpable fear of the back judge's pocket. The sheer impact of the call has warped coaching strategy at the highest levels. Offensive coordinators will specifically target certain cornerbacks known for being grabby or for drawing the attention of certain officiating crews with reputations for calling tight coverage. In crucial late-game situations, the Hail Mary is no longer just a prayer. It is a calculated orchestration of chaos, where offensive players are coached to initiate contact and defensive players are coached to avoid it at all costs, creating a surreal, counterintuitive dynamic in what should be a frenzied fight for the ball. The threat of the penalty is often more powerful than its application. It lives in the minds of defenders, altering their technique on every single passing down. So we are left with a penalty that is, by its very construction, a failure of precise law. It is a necessary failure, for without it, the game would revert to brutality. But it is a failure nonetheless. It asks human beings to perform impossible feats of perception and judgment, and then layers that request with the immense weight of game consequences and career ramifications. It is the perfect storm of subjectivity and impact. It proves that the most powerful play in football might not be a throw or a catch, but a decision. And for every decision made, for every flag thrown that sparks controversy, there exists its equally potent and often more destructive twin, the decision not to throw it. The flag that stays in the pocket, the whistle that is never blown. This is the Phantom Menace, the void where judgment is withheld, and where the resulting silence can be deafening. The penalty that is called becomes a fact. It is entered into the record. It is debated, decried, or defended, but it exists. It has been acknowledged. There is, however, a more haunting, more corrosive species of officiating error. It is the void where a flag should be. It is the silence of a whistle that never comes. It is the non-call. This is the Phantom Menace of football, the ghost play that alters history without ever officially occurring. While a bad call feels like an injustice, a critical non-call in a decisive moment feels like an abandonment of the game's fundamental covenant. It is the official's decision to become a spectator at the very instant he is needed most. And no single moment in modern NFL history embodies this, or exposes its devastating consequences, more than the final 2 minutes of the 2018 NFC Championship game. The setting was the Mercedes-Benz Superdome in New Orleans. The Saints, led by Drew Brees, were driving in a tie game against the Los Angeles Rams with under 2 minutes to play. On a critical third down, Brees threw a pass to receiver Tommy Lee Lewis near the sideline. What happened next was not subtle. It was not a borderline grab or a moment of hand-fighting. Rams cornerback nickel Roby Coleman launched himself into Lewis, arriving a full second before the ball, making no play for it whatsoever, delivering a helmet-to-helmet hit that sent Lewis spinning to the turf. It was a textbook case of both pass interference and helmet-to-helmet contact. It was so blatant that Roby Coleman immediately looked to the officials, expecting the flag. The entire stadium, both benches, and millions watching at home held their breath. The officials, a crew led by referee Bill Vinovich, conferred. And then nothing. No flag. The whistle remained silent. The game continued. The Saints, forced to kick a field goal, left the Rams time to tie and eventually win in overtime, sending Los Angeles to the Super Bowl. The aftermath was a unique kind of sports trauma. It was not anger. It was utter disbelief that curdled into a profound, systemic grief. Saints coach Sean Payton's face on the sideline, a mask of stunned horror, said everything. After the game, he revealed he had spoken to the league office. They told him, in his words, "They blew the call." Roby Coleman was even more candid. "I got there too early. I was beat and I was trying to save the touchdown. It was PI. The officials had not missed a close play. They had chosen, for reasons that remain opaque, to not call an unambiguous, game-defining foul." The league's apology the next day was unprecedented in its admission of error, but it was a sterile, worthless artifact. Could not change the result. Could not give the Saints the ball, the first down, the chance to run out the clock and kick a winning field goal as time expired. A Super Bowl berth had been vaporized not by a mistake of commission, but by a catastrophic failure of nerve. This non-call was the ultimate indictment of the let-them-play philosophy taken to a suicidal extreme. The idea that officials should not insert themselves into the game's biggest moments is a seductive one. It speaks to a desire for the players to decide the outcome. But it creates a paradox. By refusing to officiate, the official does decide the outcome. He decides by abdication. In the crucible of a championship game, the pressure on a crew is unimaginable. The fear of deciding the game with a flag can become so overpowering that it paralyzes the very judgment required to do the job. The crew in New Orleans didn't see a non-penalty. They saw a penalty of such magnitude that calling it would have decided the game. So they chose the alternative, which was to decide the game by not calling it. It was a catastrophic failure of logic under fire. The ripple effects were immediate and legislative. The public outcry was so overwhelming, the injustice so naked, that the NFL was shamed into action. For the 2019 season, they instituted a 1-year experiment allowing pass interference calls and non-calls to be subject to video review by Coach's Challenge. It was a direct, panicked response to the Saints-Rams debacle. The experiment was a spectacular failure, as reviews almost never overturned the calls on the field, creating a new layer of confusion and frustration. But its genesis is telling. The league was so terrified of another Phantom Menace that it willingly broke its own replay protocols to try and exorcise it. The rule was abandoned after one season, but the scar on the league's credibility remains. The Phantom Menace lives in the space between what is seen and what is acknowledged. It is more damaging than a bad call because it suggests not error, but indifference. It fuels the most toxic conspiracy theories, the idea that the league has a narrative it prefers, and that officials are instructed, subtly or not, to avoid flags that would disrupt it. For Saints fans, and for neutral observers who value competitive integrity, the 2018 NFC Championship is not a game the Rams won. It is a game the officials took. The non-call became the defining play, the absent flag a symbol of a broken system. It proved that the most powerful official on the field is not the one who throws a flag, but the one who, with a flag in his pocket and a whistle in his mouth, chooses to become a statue. This event forced a reckoning with the psychological pressure on officials in a way no bad call ever could. It asked, what are they so afraid of? The answer is complex. They are afraid of the downgrade from New York, yes. But they are also afraid of the viral infamy, the death threats, the permanent branding as the man who stole a championship. In that moment of terror, the path of least resistance can feel like silence. But in the NFL, silence is not neutrality. Silence is a verdict. And as the financial stakes around the game have ballooned beyond tickets and television deals, as a massive, legalized industry has risen with a voracious appetite for precise outcomes, the pressure of that silence has magnified 1,000-fold. The ghost of the non-call now haunts not just legacy, but the ledger. The scrutiny has always existed. The anger of a fan whose team lost, the frustration of a coach whose game plan was derailed by a flag. These are ancient currencies in the economy of sports passion. But in the modern era, a new, cold, and exponentially more calculating form of scrutiny has been superimposed upon the old. It is not driven by loyalty, but by ledger. It is not measured in heartbreak, but in profit and loss. The legalization of sports betting across the United States has not just changed how fans watch football. It has fundamentally altered the atmosphere in which the game is officiated. We are not here to allege corruption. We are here to map a fog, a pervasive, inescapable mist of suspicion and amplified consequence that now envelopes every close call, every missed call, every decision that tilts the point spread. This is an examination of the gambling fog and how the league's most powerful, secretive institution, its officiating core, navigates or fails to navigate within it. For decades, the NFL treated gambling as a radioactive contaminant, the one force that could destroy the league's credibility. They banned players for life for betting on games. They fought legalization ferociously, but the tectonic plates shifted. Faced with a Supreme Court decision and the inevitability of a booming market, the league executed a breathtaking pivot. It embraced sportsbooks as official partners. Betting lines and prop odds are now discussed openly on the league's own broadcasts. This integration is complete, and it is permanent. The result is a profound cognitive dissonance for the officials on the field. The league that once told them gambling was the existential devil now profits from its ubiquity, while asking them, the arbiters, to remain pristine, untouched angels floating above the financial chaos their calls inevitably influence. The pressure is no longer abstract. It is quantifiable. A point spread is not a feeling. It is a number. A missed pass interference call on a third down in the fourth quarter doesn't just change field position. It shifts the probability models of every live bet on the game. A questionable holding penalty that brings back a touchdown doesn't just cost a team 7 points. It vaporizes millions of dollars in parlays and teaser bets across the country. The officials know this. They are not hermits. They see the advertisements, they hear the commentary. They understand that for a growing portion of the audience, the narrative of wins and losses is secondary to the narrative of the cover, the over, under, the prop bet. A former referee told me, with a tone of resigned exhaustion, "You used to worry about screwing up a team's season. Now, in the back of your mind, you know you're screwing up someone's mortgage payment, and that someone might be unhinged. the threat profile changes entirely. The league's protocols for insulating officials are a mix of the practical and the paternalistic. Officials are prohibited from engaging in any form of sports gambling, a rule aggressively enforced. They receive security briefings. They are instructed to avoid media discussions of betting and to be vigilant about any attempts at improper contact. But these are defensive measures. They do nothing to address the pervasive perception problem. For when a close call goes against the spread, the reaction on social media and in the darker corners of the internet is instantaneous and vicious. It is no longer the refs are blind. It is the fix is in. The conspiracy theories are now backed by pseudo-financial analysis, pointing to betting line movements or the financial impact on sportsbooks as proof of orchestrated outcomes. This fog of suspicion is poison to the credibility the league desperately needs its officials to possess. The 2018 NFC Championship non-call is the quintessential case study of an officiating decision thrust into the gambling fog. Beyond the sheer sporting injustice, the financial ramifications were staggering. The point spread had the Saints favored by 3 points. The non-call likely cost them the game in regulation, forcing overtime where the Rams won outright. The Saints did not cover the spread. Millions of bets hinged on that result. In the immediate aftermath, the discourse was not solely about the Saints' lost Super Bowl chance. It was flooded with accusations of a script to benefit the larger Los Angeles market, or even whispers, entirely baseless but amplified by the new financial context, about the influence of sharps or bookmaker exposure. The gambling fog transformed a terrible officiating error into a potential financial crime in the minds of many. The league's apology did nothing to clear this fog. It merely confirmed the error that had cost bettors money. This creates an impossible bind for the officials. In the past, a mistake was a mistake. Now, in the fog, a mistake is potentially evidence of something far darker. It forces a second-guessing that has nothing to do with the rulebook. Could a borderline call, if made, be seen as altering the point spread? Would not making it be seen the same way? The league insists its officials are not, and cannot be, aware of point spreads during games. But this is a fantasy. The spread is the atmosphere. To believe they are immune to its pervasive presence is to misunderstand human psychology entirely. The pressure is no longer just to be right for the sake of the game. It is to be right in a way that appears in a hyperskeptical world, to be beyond the corrupting influence of billions of dollars swirling around the sport they adjudicate. The NFL finds itself in a paradox of its own making. It has welcomed a gold rush that inherently threatens the integrity it is built upon. It has made its officials both the guardians of that integrity and the potential targets of an entire industry's scrutiny and blame. The league can issue all the protocols it wants, but it cannot uninvent the reality it has sanctioned. Every close call is now a financial event. Every whistle is a market-moving signal. The fog is permanent, and navigating it requires more than rules. It requires a level of public trust that the league's own secretive, unaccountable system of officiating has already eroded. In its frantic attempt to correct the very human mistakes that feed this distrust, the league turned to technology, creating a replay system meant to be a lighthouse in the fog. But as we would soon discover, the light it cast only created deeper, more confusing shadows. The pursuit of perfection is a human obsession. In a game built on violent, chaotic imperfection, the National Football League has spent decades chasing the ghost of the flawless call. Its chosen tool for this hunt is technology. In 1986, the league introduced instant replay review as an experiment, a way to correct the most egregious mistakes. It was crude, limited, and controversial. They abandoned it, then brought it back in 1999 in a more permanent form. What began as a safety net for obvious errors has evolved into a sprawling Byzantine institution of its own. We called it a revolution. We believed high-definition cameras, super slow motion, and a centralized command center in New York would purify the game, would exorcise the demons of human error. But the revolution is unfinished, and the cure has proven to be its own kind of disease. Replay was meant to be a panacea. Instead, it has become a hall of mirrors, reflecting back our own confusion and creating new, more complex controversies from the very mistakes it was designed to erase. The foundational promise of replay was simple: to use technology to achieve certainty. If a runner's knee was down before the ball came loose, we could see it. If a receiver dragged a toe in bounds, we could confirm it. In these binary, factual determinations, replay has been a resounding success. It has corrected thousands of mistakes that would have otherwise stood. But the NFL, driven by public pressure after every high-profile error, kept expanding replay's mandate. It moved from facts to interpretations. It began asking the technology to answer questions it was never equipped to handle. Did the quarterback begin a passing motion? Was there clear and obvious visual evidence to overturn a pass interference call? Did the receiver complete the process of a catch? These are not factual questions with yes or no answers. They are philosophical inquiries about intent and degree, and when you apply a technological microscope to a philosophical question, you do not get clarity. You get paralysis. The central paradox of the replay era is this: we have more camera angles, higher resolution, and slower frame rates than ever before, and yet we have less definitive agreement on what we are seeing. A catch that looks complete at full speed can, when broken down into 100 individual frames, become a surrealist painting of possibilities. The ball shifts a millimeter. The fingers tremble. The ground seems to interact with the pigskin in ways that defy classical physics. The famous Calvin Johnson rule of 2010, where a receiver was ruled to have not completed a catch despite seemingly doing everything right, was a creation of the replay microscope. It was a call made not from the perspective of the game, but from the perspective of a forensic scientist examining a crime scene. The rule itself was bad, but it was replay that enabled its absurd application. We are now officiating a video game that exists between frames, a phantom football that lives in the spaces between milliseconds. This technological intrusion has created a new, crippling subjectivity, the standard of proof. The language indisputable visual evidence is the most loaded term in officiating. It is a legal standard applied to a visual one. What is indisputable to one person in the replay booth can be highly disputable to another, and certainly to the millions watching at home. The replay official is not looking for what happened. He is looking for a visual clue so unambiguous that it can survive the scrutiny of the league office and the public outrage. This leads to the maddening phenomenon of a call on the field standing not because it was right, but because the video, despite suggesting otherwise, did not provide a clear and obvious reason to change it. The system defaults to the initial human error, protecting it with a shield of technological ambiguity. The original sin is preserved in digital amber. Then there is the agonizing cost of this process: time. The rhythm of football is one of violent bursts followed by strategic pauses. Replay has inserted a new, sterile, and interminable pause into the heart of the game's most critical moments. The coach's challenge flag, a red cloth that now carries the weight of seasons, stops everything. Players stand in limbo, their adrenaline cooling. Crowds murmur in confused suspense. The officials don the headsets, becoming tech support agents in a soundproof booth. Minutes tick by as officials in New York examine angles. The drama of sport is replaced by the anxiety of a pending software update. And when the decision finally comes, it is often delivered with the lifeless, bureaucratic language of a tribunal, draining the moment of any organic emotion. We traded spontaneity for a dubious accuracy, and in the process we may have lost the soul of the live event. Most destructively, replay has created a two-tiered system of justice. Not all plays are reviewable. Judgment calls, holding, pass interference after the failed experiment, roughing the passer are largely immune. This creates a cognitive dissonance for fans and players. Why can we use all this technology to determine if a blade of grass was touched, but we cannot use it to correct an obvious, game-swinging hold on the same play? It tells us that some mistakes are too sacred to be corrected, or too complex for the technology to handle. It creates a world where a millimeter matters on a catch, but a full-second early hit on a receiver does not merit the same scrutiny. The system admits its own limitations by its very design, highlighting the arbitrary line between a factual error and a judgment error, a line that vanishes for those on the losing end of it. The replay revolution was born from a noble desire to get it right, but in its execution, it has revealed a more profound truth. You cannot engineer the humanity out of football. The quest for perfect officiating through technology is like trying to remove the water from a river and still have a river. The flow, the energy, the life of the game is inextricably linked to its human fallibility. Replay has not ended controversies. It has simply given them a higher definition, a longer runtime, and a more frustrating conclusion. It has moved the debate from the field to the replay booth, from a split-second decision to a multi-minute dissection, and in doing so, it has nurtured a new, more virulent strain of distrust. For if, with all our cameras and our slow motion, we still cannot agree on what we are seeing, then maybe the problem is not with the eyes of the officials. Maybe the problem is with the game we are asking them and our technology to oversee. This pervasive distrust, this sense that even the corrective measures are broken, has fertile ground in which to grow wild theories, to see patterns where none exist, and to construct entire narratives of control from the raw material of human error. We live in the age of the narrative. We do not merely witness events. We construct stories from them, seeking cause where there is often only chance, seeking design where there is often only chaos. In the high-stakes, emotionally charged universe of the NFL, where outcomes have profound financial and cultural consequences, the human mind rebels against randomness. It rejects the idea that a multi-billion-dollar enterprise could hinge on something as capricious as a single official split-second judgment. And so, it seeks a more orderly, if more sinister, explanation. This is the fertile ground from which the conspiracy theory industry grows. It is not a fringe element. It is a mainstream undercurrent, a persistent whisper that becomes a roar in the wake of every controversial call. This batch is not an endorsement of these theories. It is a dissection of them. We will examine the psychological roots of the belief in scripted outcomes or league-instructed bias, analyze the games held up as evidence, and listen to the men in stripes describe what it feels like to be accused of cheating the very sport they have dedicated their lives to upholding. The psychology is rooted in a fundamental human need for control and agency. When your team loses on a questionable call, the pain is acute. To attribute that loss to mere human error, to the failings of a well-intentioned but flawed official feels hollow, unsatisfying. It is far more emotionally coherent to believe the loss was orchestrated, that it served a larger purpose. This grants the event meaning, even if that meaning is malign. It transforms the fan from a passive victim of fate into a righteous truth troubler, fighting against a corrupt system. This mindset is supercharged by the league's own culture of secrecy. When the NFL operates its officiating department like a classified program, when it refuses to make grading public or to hold meaningful public postmortems on major errors, it surrenders the narrative. He creates an information vacuum, and nature, especially internet nature, abhors a vacuum. Into that void rush the theories. The league wants the big market team to advance. The narrative of the young superstar quarterback is preordained. The television networks demand a close game for ratings. The league's opacity is the conspiracy theorists' most powerful piece of evidence. Specific games become foundational texts in this alternate canon. The tuck rule game is not seen as an application of an obscure rule, but as the league's deliberate intervention to launch the Patriots dynasty, a storyline with long-term value. The Fail Mary with the replacement officials is framed not as incompetence, but as a staged crisis designed to break the referees' union and make the real officials seem like heroes upon their return. The non-call in the 2018 NFC Championship is viewed not as a catastrophic mistake, but as a deliberate move to deliver the Los Angeles market to the Super Bowl. The evidence presented is always circumstantial, built on outcome and motive, never on a smoking gun. Proponents point to the financial benefits of certain outcomes, the league's history of favoring certain franchises, or the perceived momentum of calls during a game that seemed to guide it toward a dramatic finish. It is a theology of pattern recognition, where coincidence is curated into proof. For the officials on the receiving end of these accusations, the experience is isolating and infuriating. A retired referee, a man who served for over 25 years, described it to me with palpable anger. You spend your life trying to be fair. You study, you train, you sacrifice time with your family. You take the abuse from the crowd because it's part of the job. But when you hear people say you're cheating, that you're on the take, that you're following some script from New York, it cuts different. Questions your integrity, your life's work. It reduces you to a cartoon villain. And the league does nothing to defend you. They throw you to the wolves. They let the narrative fester because addressing it might give it legitimacy. So you sit in silence, accused of betraying the game you love. Another official spoke of the chilling effect. You start to wonder, if I make this correct but unpopular call, what will they say about me online? What threats will my family get? The noise gets in your head, and the only way to quiet it is to try to be perfect, which is impossible. Separating emotional reaction from factual evidence is critical. There is zero credible evidence of the NFL instructing officials to fix games or steer outcomes. The logistical and legal hurdles are insurmountable. It would require the complicit silence of hundreds of officials over decades, a secret kept amid a culture of intense scrutiny and internal rivalry. The financial risk to the league would be cataclysmic. The scandal would dwarf any short-term gain from a manipulated Super Bowl. The simpler and far more uncomfortable explanation is almost always true. The officials are human beings performing an impossibly difficult job under extreme pressure, and they make mistakes. The league's financial structures may create unconscious biases, a subconscious lean toward keeping star players healthy or marquee markets engaged. But these are far removed from a centralized conspiracy. Yet, to dismiss the conspiracy theorists as mere cranks is to miss the point. They are a symptom, not the disease. The disease is a profound breach of trust between the league and its audience. The NFL has commodified everything, from the broadcast to the jersey patches to the gambling partnerships. But it has failed to protect the one commodity it cannot sell: integrity. By treating officiating as a black box, by failing to provide transparent accountability, by using replay in inconsistent and frustrating ways, the league has actively fostered the conditions for distrust to flourish. The conspiracy theories are a distorted reflection of the fans' desperate desire for the game to be fair. They are a malformed plea for the purity of competition. The league's silence is heard as confirmation. In the end, the conspiracy theory industry thrives because the official story is often so poorly told. It is a story of secrecy, of non-answers, of shielded processes. Until the league understands that its demand for blind faith is unsustainable in a skeptical age, the whispers will continue. They will continue to paint the men in stripes not as flawed arbiters, but as agents of a hidden design. And this constant, grinding accusation takes a toll that extends far beyond a bad grade from New York. It seeps into the home, into the family, into the quiet moments when a man must reckon with the personal cost of wearing the uniform. The whistle may shield him from the physical violence on the field, but it offers no protection from the psychological violence that follows him long after the crowd has gone home. There is a uniform, but it is not like the ones worn by the players. Theirs are celebrated, iconic, lifted into the rafters. This uniform is a target. The white hat, the black and white stripes, they are not a banner of authority to the crowd. They are a license for hatred. We have examined the system, the pressure, the controversies, and the conspiracy theories. But we have not yet looked into the eyes of the men who stand at the center of the storm. This is the story of the human cost. This is about life inside the stripe, a life of profound isolation, relentless abuse, and a quiet, corrosive pressure that extends far beyond the 3 hours on Sunday. It is about the price of being the arbiter in a world that has lost its capacity for grace. The isolation begins the moment you accept the job. You are removed from the fraternity of the game. You are not a former player. You are not part of the team's fabric. You are an external agent, a necessary intruder. This isolation is codified in the rules. Officials travel separately, stay in different hotels, enter stadiums through anonymous service entrances. They eat pre-game meals alone as a crew, a unit of 7 in a sea of thousands. There is no camaraderie with the athletes, only a strained, transactional respect that can vanish with one whistle. A retired line judge described it to me as the loneliness of the neutral. You are for no one. And in a world built on tribal loyalty, being for no one feels like being against everyone. This professional quarantine seeps into their personal lives. They cannot openly celebrate or commiserate with friends who are fans. They learn to avoid sports talk radio, to scroll past social media commentary, to deflect questions at neighborhood barbecues. Their vocation becomes a secret they carry, not with pride, but with a weary defensiveness. Then comes the abuse, a torrent that is both generalized and terrifyingly specific. The roar of the crowd on a contested call is not just noise. It is a wave of pure, directed animus. Officials are trained to tune it out, but the body records the vibration. You feel it in your chest, a former back judge said. 70,000 people hating you personally in that moment. They don't know your name, but they know your number. And they will scream it, along with things about your eyesight, your intelligence, your parentage. This is the tame part. The digital age has weaponized the abuse. After a controversial game, officials' social media accounts, if they are foolish enough to have them under their own names, are flooded with threats and vile insults. Their Wikipedia pages are vandalized. But more chilling are the efforts to bridge the digital and the real. Officials have had their home addresses posted online. They have received death threats in the mail, threatening not just them, but their wives and children. The league provides security resources, but the damage is psychological. You become a protector in your own home, jumping at unfamiliar cars on your street, teaching your kids to be vague about what their father does for a living. The impact on family is the deepest, most unspoken wound. Spouses become de facto security detail and emotional sponges, absorbing the rage their partners cannot show. Children are bullied at school because of a call their father made. One referee's wife told me of answering the phone to a voice so thick with rage it made her physically ill. A man screaming that her husband had ruined his life and he knew where they lived. She hung up, pulled her children from the local school for a week, and never told her husband until the season was over, fearing it would shatter his concentration. The job demands absolute mental focus on weekends, which means weekends are stolen from family life. Birthdays, anniversaries, school plays, all are sacrificed to the schedule. And when you return home, you are not present. You are replaying the game in your mind, dreading the Tuesday grading report, carrying the emotional residue of being America's villain. Beneath the fear and the isolation lies the relentless, grinding pressure of perfection. It is not the pressure to win. It is the pressure to be invisible. A perfect game is one where no one notices you. This is the cruel paradox. You are hypervisible when you fail, and you are expected to aspire to anonymity. The grading system in New York is the sword of Damocles. Every Tuesday, you are mathematically scored on your humanity. The pursuit of that elusive high grade shapes everything. It can turn partners into silent competitors, wary of being dragged down by another's mistake. It can make you risk-averse, flagging marginal plays to avoid a missed call downgrade, which in turn fuels the very fan anger you fear. The pressure does not end with retirement. It echoes. Every official has a ghost play, the one that visits them in the quiet of the night, decades later. A veteran umpire, now in his 70s, still dreams of a fumble in the 1980s. He was blocked out of the pile, couldn't see who recovered. He made a guess. The grading said he was wrong. He has never been sure. You move on, he said, his voice thin. But you don't forget. It's a ledger you keep in your soul, and the debits are always brighter than the credits. Another spoke of a pass interference no-call in a playoff game. He was screened, saw only the aftermath. The replay showed a clear foul. His crew took the blame. I cost those men a chance to work the Super Bowl. They never said it, but I knew. That's a different kind of weight. You let down your brothers. These are not regrets about public perception. These are professional and personal failures etched into their identity. They are men who dedicated their lives to fairness, tormented by the memory of the times they were, despite all their effort, unfair. This is the life in the stripe. It is a vocation chosen not for glory, but for a love of order and a belief in the structure of the game. It is repaid in isolation, fear, and the haunting specter of mistakes that can never be fully undone. They are the flawed guardians of a faith that has largely lost its religion. They are blamed for the sins of the system, scapegoated for the league's opacity, and painted as villains in a drama they only wish to adjudicate fairly. They walk off the field each Sunday, their ears ringing with the echoes of hatred, and return to a world that views them through a lens of suspicion, all while preparing to do it again, chasing the phantom of a perfect, unnoticed game. And as they navigate this relentless barrage of personal condemnation, they must also face a newly professionalized form of scrutiny, an entire media ecosystem built on dissecting their every flaw, turning their mistakes into a week's worth of content and controversy. The eye in the sky is no longer confined to a league office in New York. It has proliferated. It lives in every broadcast truck, in every sports studio, on every smartphone. The scrutiny faced by NFL officials has undergone a radical transformation, evolving from the post-game grumblings of local newspapers and radio shows into a permanent, multi-platform, high-definition inquisition. This is the modern media landscape, an ecosystem engineered to dissect, debate, and often destroy. It is an environment where every official's decision is no longer a single judgment call, but raw material for a week's worth of content, a spark for millions of real-time reactions, and a test of credibility played out on a screen rather than a field. This batch examines the rigors of this new scrutiny. We will analyze the army of television analysts with their laser pointers and super slow motion, the explosive, algorithmically fueled outrage of social media, and the 24-hour news cycle that demands controversy to survive. The central question is not whether officials are watched, but how this watching changes them, changes the game, and changes our understanding of what a mistake actually costs. The first wave of this transformation came from television itself. The advent of the telestrator, the isolating slow-motion replay, and the former player-turned-analyst created a new authority, the broadcast critic. No longer was the official's view the only one that mattered. Now, a retired quarterback in a suit, with the benefit of 8 camera angles and the ability to rewind and circle faults, could deliver a verdict to millions. This dynamic shifted the perception of expertise. The official's real-time, singular perspective was devalued against the analyst's omniscient, technological hindsight. The analyst's role, by the brutal economics of television, is to be compelling. Nuance is quiet, certainty is loud. Thus, borderline calls are presented as obvious errors. Phrases like, "How do you miss that?" or "That's an easy call" became staples of the broadcast, embedding in the public mind the idea that what officials do is simple, and that their failures are therefore inexplicable or indicative of something worse. This constant second-guessing from a position of perfect information created an expectation of similar perfection from an inherently imperfect process. Then came the second, more democratized and volatile wave, social media. This did not just amplify the television critique, it weaponized it and distributed the weapons to everyone. In the minutes, even seconds, following a controversial call, platforms like Twitter and Facebook become digital coliseums of outrage. The mistake is isolated into a 10-second clip, stripped of context, and set loose to infect the global conversation. The official's name and photograph are attached. The response is immediate, personal, and vicious. It is no longer a faceless roar from a stadium. It is a tagged comment calling for your firing, a meme portraying you as blind, a direct message threatening your family. The feedback loop is instantaneous and unforgiving. Where a bad call might once have been debated over days in letters to the editor, it now trends worldwide in minutes, accruing layers of commentary, conspiracy, and condemnation before the official has even reached the locker room. This environment creates what one sports sociologist termed the scandalization of error. A subjective judgment in a fast-moving game is no longer a part of the sports fabric. It is a standalone scandal, with its own life cycle. It is identified on Sunday, diagnosed on Monday by talk radio and studio shows, litigated on Tuesday and Wednesday by podcasts and columnists, and used as a pregame narrative for the following Thursday. The mistake becomes a character in the season's story. The official is not a person who erred. He is a villain who altered the plot. This cycle is fed by the league's own secretive system, because the NFL provides no transparent accountability, no public downgrades, no explanations of consequences. The media and the public fill the void with speculation, anger, and demands for heads to roll. The silence from Park Avenue is the oxygen for the fire. For the officials, this relentless, multi-front scrutiny has a profound psychological impact. It makes the job inescapable. A former referee described the torture of the post-game flight home before the smartphone era. You had a few hours of quiet, just you and your thoughts. Now, the second you're off the field, your phone is buzzing. Your friends are texting you links to hot takes. Your wife is seeing the threats online. There is no off-ramp. The game follows you into the car, onto the plane, into your kitchen. This constant bombardment exacerbates the pressure of perfection. It creates a chilling effect where officials might anticipate the media and social reaction to a call before making it. Will this holding penalty on a star player trigger a week of talk? Will this no call on a borderline hit become the clip that defines my career? The decision-making process, which must be instinctual and rooted in the rulebook, now has a shadow commentary running alongside it. A voice asking not, is this right? But how will this play? Does this scrutiny create accountability or an impossible environment? The argument for accountability is valid. The glaring spotlight has undoubtedly forced the league to address issues it might have once ignored. The replacement referee fiasco ended in part because the media narrative became untenable. The non-call in New Orleans led to a failed rule change because the outrage was too loud to mute. In this sense, the media acts as a check on the league's power, holding its opaque officiating system to a form of public trial. It demands answers the league is reluctant to give. But the cost of this accountability is a corrosive, impossible environment for the individuals tasked with the job. The scrutiny is not constructive. It is performative and punitive. It does not seek to understand the difficulty. It seeks to assign blame. It turns human error into moral failing. It creates a world where officials are not allowed to be merely good at an impossible job. They are demanded to be flawless, and their failures are framed as betrayals. This atmosphere does not produce better officiating. It produces traumatized, defensive officiating. It encourages the prevent defense mentality, throw the flag to avoid the viral miss, that ultimately warps the game itself. The officials are now caught in a pincer movement. From one side, the cold, silent judgment of the league's internal grading system in New York. From the other, the hot, screaming judgment of the public square, amplified by media to deafening levels. They must please both masters to survive, and the masters want contradictory things, robotic accuracy and human understanding. It is an equation with no solution, and as the pressure from the scrutiny mounts, as the demand for perfect, controversy-free outcomes grows louder, the league's gaze turns inevitably toward a promised land where the human element, the source of all this trouble, might be engineered out altogether. The search for a solution moves from the realm of psychology and management to the realm of silicon and code, to a world where the final authority may not be a man in a striped shirt, but an algorithm in a server. The pursuit of perfection is a relentless engine. Having confronted the human cost of error, the league's gaze turns, with a mixture of desperation and ambition, toward a horizon where the flaws of flesh and blood are eliminated by the certainty of silicon and code. We are no longer speaking of mere replay review. We are entering the realm of the algorithmic future, a world where the whistle may be blown not by a man's breath, but by a digital signal. This is a speculative, yet increasingly tangible frontier. It is an investigation into technologies that promise to purify the game of its human contaminants. Sensor-based ball and line spotting, computer vision trained to detect penalties, and the specter of a largely robotic officiating system. But this future forces upon us a profound and unsettling question. In chasing perfect accuracy, do we risk extracting the very soul of the sport? What is the trade-off when we remove the human from the human element? The first beachhead of this invasion is already established: the digitization of objective facts. In tennis, Hawkeye tracks a ball's trajectory with millimeter precision. In soccer, goal line technology provides an instant, indisputable verdict. The NFL has been slowly, cautiously implementing its own versions. The next-gen stats system uses RFID chips in players' shoulder pads and the football to track movement in real time. The logical extension is clear: automated first down measurements and goal line spots. No more chain crews straining. No more officials peering through a pile of bodies to guess a ball's placement. A sensor in the ball and in the turf would know definitively. This seems an unambiguous good, a removal of a tedious, error-prone process. But even here, a subtle loss occurs. The dramatic, tension-filled measurement, the coach challenging the spot, the collective held breath as the officials huddle over the ball. These are minor rituals of the game, small moments of human theater that would be replaced by a sterile, instant graphic on the scoreboard. The friction of uncertainty, a fundamental source of drama, is sanded smooth. The next, and far more complex, frontier is the algorithmic judgment of subjective acts. This is where research labs and tech startups are training artificial intelligence. Using vast libraries of game film, machine learning models are being taught to recognize patterns that constitute a penalty. A hold, a block in the back, a pass interference. Theoretically, a computer vision system could analyze camera feeds in real time, flag potential infractions, and relay them to a replay official or even directly to the referee's headset. The promise is the elimination of inconsistency. The AI would not get tired, would not be influenced by a crowd, would not carry the baggage of a previous call. It would apply the same standard to the first play and the last in Week 1 and the Super Bowl. It is the ultimate fulfillment of the league's desire for a perfectly level, immutable playing field. But the devil, as always, is in the data and the definitions. How do you teach an algorithm the concept of significant hindrance or forcible contact? You feed it thousands of examples labeled by humans, inheriting all the subjective biases and inconsistencies of those very labels. The algorithm would codify the prevailing interpretation of the rule, freezing it in time and amplifying it. It would lack the capacity for game feel, for the intuitive understanding that a slight hand fight on a 3RD and 20 incompletion is different from a mugging on a game-winning touchdown pass. More dangerously, it could be manipulated. Offensive linemen, masters of finding the gray area, would learn the precise pixel-based movements that trigger or avoid an AI hold detection. The game would become a competition against a machine parameters, not just against an opponent. The human artistry of cheating the rules, a dark skill as old as sports itself, would evolve into a new form of digital hacking. The most extreme vision is a fully automated officiating system. No crew on the field, just sensors, cameras, and algorithms with a central command maybe validating the computer's decisions. This would eradicate the human cost we have documented, the abuse, the threats, the isolation. It would also eradicate the official as a participant. The game would become a closed loop between athletes and code. The loss here is profound but difficult to quantify. It is the loss of nuanced judgment, of the ability to communicate with players, to explain a call, to manage the emotional temperature of a contest. A referee can warn a linebacker about getting too handsy before throwing a flag. An algorithm simply throws it. A human crew can confer, bringing multiple perspectives to a chaotic play. An algorithm has a single, programmed perspective. The flow of the game, managed by humans for other humans, would be subject to the immutable, unfeeling logic of a process. This pursuit is ultimately a reflection of our own diminished tolerance for ambiguity. The NFL's officiating crises have eroded trust to such a degree that a flawed human system feels unacceptable. The algorithmic future promises a return to trust, but it is a trust of a different kind, a trust in the infallibility of code, a faith in the machine. Yet, who programs the machine? Who chooses the training data? Who defines the thresholds for a penalty? These would become the new, even more opaque points of control, hidden behind layers of proprietary software and corporate secrecy. The conspiracy theories would not vanish. They would evolve. Instead of "the refs are fixing it," the cry would become "the algorithm is rigged." We stand at a crossroads. One path leads toward a sanitized, hyper-efficient, and potentially sterile product where mistakes are engineered out, along with much of the game's organic humanity. The other path requires a radical and perhaps impossible rehabilitation of the human system. Embracing transparency, reforming the rulebook for clarity, and rebuilding public trust through openness rather than obfuscation. The league is currently trying to walk both paths at once, which may be the worst choice of all. For in clinging to a broken human system while lusting after a robotic one, they are creating a present where no one is satisfied, and a future where the soul of the game may be the ultimate casualty. This unresolved tension, this failure to fix the core issues, has led us to the brink of a systemic crisis not of error, but of credibility itself. We have navigated the anatomy of the whistle, witnessed history altered by a single interpretation, survived the farce of the replacements, and felt the weight of silent judgment from New York. We have walked the gauntlet of subjective penalties, been haunted by phantom non-calls, and observed how the gambling fog and the media storm distort every decision. We have sat with the human cost and peered into an algorithmic future. Now, we arrive at the synthesis, at the undeniable conclusion to which all these paths lead. The NFL's greatest officiating crisis is no longer about mistakes. It is about trust. A single bad call can be forgiven. A system that is perceived as opaque, unaccountable, and defensive cannot be. The league is no longer battling human error. It is battling a systemic erosion of credibility, a fundamental breach of faith with the players who play, the coaches who coach, and the fans who invest their passion in the game. This is the crisis, the growing, pervasive belief that the system is not merely fallible, but is fundamentally unfair. The evidence of this erosion is not in the penalty flags, but in the reactions to them. Watch the face of a veteran linebacker after a dubious roughing the passer call. It is not just frustration. It is a profound, weary disillusionment. Listen to the post-game press conference of a head coach, choosing his words with legalistic care to avoid a fine, yet his meaning is clear. The game was taken from them by forces beyond their control. Read the social media posts of star players, not in the heat of the moment, but in the cool reflection of a Tuesday, questioning the integrity of the very enterprise that provides their livelihood. These are not the outbursts of sore losers. They are the symptoms of a deep-seated conviction that the rules are not applied evenly, that the process is a black box, and that the league's primary interest is in protecting the system itself, not the integrity of the competition within it. The league's communication strategy has been a masterclass in fostering this distrust. It operates on a model of defensive minimalism. When a catastrophic error occurs, like the non-call in New Orleans, the response follows a predictable pattern. A delayed, sterile statement acknowledging an error, often delivered through a spokesperson, never with the face of a responsible executive. It is an apology without consequence, a confession without penance. The officials involved are never identified as having been disciplined. Their grades are never revealed. The public is told a mistake was made, and then the curtain is drawn again. This does not satisfy, it infuriates. It treats the audience like children who cannot handle the truth, rather than stakeholders in a multi-billion-dollar public trust. The league's flagship transparency product, the official review video, has become a symbol of this failed approach. By carefully selecting which mildly controversial plays to explain, and framing each explanation as a definitive lesson from an omniscient authority, the league attempts to project control. Instead, it highlights the very inconsistency it seeks to obscure. Why this play and not that one? Why a detailed lecture on a holding call in Week 4, but radio silence on the game-altering pass interference in the playoffs? The curation is transparent, and it reads as manipulation. This opacity extends to the heart of the system, the relationship between the league office and the officials. The grading process in New York, as we have explored, is a secret tribunal. Its judgments are absolute, its metrics undisclosed, its consequences invisible. For the officials, this creates fear. For the public, it creates suspicion. When there is no visible accountability for error, the natural assumption is that there is none. When the league refuses to publicly stand by its officials or explain their demotions or promotions, it feeds the narrative that they are either incompetent pawns or agents of a hidden agenda. The league's steadfast refusal to make officials available to the media, to allow them to explain their thought processes after games, turns them into silent, faceless gods, dispensing arbitrary justice. We are asked to have faith in a priesthood that refuses to speak. The players and coaches are no longer buying it. They have lost faith in the system's fairness. They operate now on a presumption of guilt, the presumption that the call will go against them, that the close judgment will break for the star or the storyline or the market. This cynicism alters how they play and coach. Defensive backs play with a terror of the flag, not just a respect for the rules. Coaches challenge calls not based on their belief in the truth, but on a desperate gamble against a system they feel is stacked. The post-game handshake between coaches and officials, once a formality, now often crackles with a palpable, unspoken tension. The field, which should be a sealed competitive environment, feels increasingly like a place where external, unknowable factors hold sway. This crisis of credibility is the league's own creation. It is the inevitable result of prioritizing the appearance of infallibility over the hard work of transparent governance. It is the cost of building a fortress of secrecy around a human process. The league wanted the authority of a Supreme Court, but none of the published dissents or reasoned opinions. They wanted the finality of an algorithm with the convenience of human scapegoats. You cannot have it both ways. The trust has not eroded because officials make mistakes. It has eroded because the league has consistently chosen to hide, obfuscate, and defend those mistakes rather than to openly manage them as part of the game. The consequence is a sport standing on a brittle foundation. The gambling integration, the media scrutiny, the financial stakes. All of these modern realities demand a foundation of ironclad credibility. Instead, the foundation is made of sand, shifting with every controversial call. The league can tweak rules, experiment with replay, and issue hollow apologies. But until it confronts this core crisis of trust, it is merely applying band-aids to a hemorrhaging artery. The symptoms will keep recurring, more violently each time. The choice is no longer about improving accuracy. It is about undertaking a radical, painful rehabilitation of transparency and accountability. It is about deciding whether the game is a closed corporation protecting its product or an open competition worthy of the public's unwavering belief. The whistle has blown on the old way. The question is whether the league is listening to its own signal or if the noise of its failing credibility has drowned it out entirely. To continue on this path is to invite not just criticism, but irrelevance. The need for a new model is not theoretical. It is urgent. The outlines of that model and the formidable resistance to it form the final battleground for the soul of the game. The diagnosis is clear. The patient is sick with a profound crisis of credibility. The symptoms are chronic. Secrecy, opacity, defensiveness, and a corrosive distrust that poisons every close call. So what is the cure? For decades, voices from within and outside the league have proposed treatments, ranging from simple procedural tweaks to radical systemic overhauls. These proposals form a roadmap away from the current brink. They are the path to accountability. But a path requires a willingness to walk it, and the NFL's history is one of glacial, reluctant movement, forced only by catastrophic public relations failures. This batch is a survey of that roadmap and the formidable roadblocks erected against it. It is an examination of the proposed reforms, the league's entrenched resistance, and the growing sense that without a true reckoning, the sport's legitimacy may be permanently diminished. The most persistent proposal is the simplest. Make all NFL officials full-time, year-round employees. While a small number of referees now have full-time status, the vast majority of officials maintain other careers, as lawyers, educators, businessmen. The argument for full-time professionalization is compelling. It would allow for continuous, unified training. It would enable officials to work together as a crew throughout the week, studying film, building cohesion, and physically training to keep pace with athletes who are themselves full-time professionals. It would signal that officiating is not a weekend avocation, but a central, valued profession. The league's resistance is rooted in cost and control. Full-time salaries, benefits, and pensions for the entire roster would represent a significant expense for minimal, in the owner's view, tangible return. More subtly, it would grant officials greater stature and potentially more bargaining power, altering a dynamic the league has long preferred to keep firmly in its favor. The current part-time model keeps officials economically and psychologically dependent, a state the league has exploited during labor negotiations. The most critical and most fiercely resisted suite of proposals revolves around transparency. This includes the public release of graded performance reports, the identification of officials who are benched or demoted for poor performance, and clear, detailed explanations of disciplinary actions. The logic is unassailable. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. If the public could see that mistakes have concrete consequences, that the official who missed a pivotal call was removed from a primetime game the following week, It would rebuild a measure of trust in the system's integrity. It would transform officials from shielded, untouchable figures into accountable professionals. The league's opposition is categorical and vehement. They argue it would subject officials to unbearable public harassment and second-guessing. But this argument rings hollow, as officials already endure maximal harassment in an information vacuum. The truth is that transparency would expose the league's own management to scrutiny. It would reveal the frequency of errors, the inconsistency of grading, and force the league to publicly defend its standards. It is a threat to the control of the narrative, and the league would rather preserve the myth of private perfection than engage with the messy reality of public accountability. Directly tied to this is the proposal for a dedicated, moderated press pool for officials. Once a month, or after controversial games, a pool reporter could pose questions to the crew chief or the league's officiating head, with answers provided on the record. This would break the maddening cycle where the only information comes from anonymous league sources or coach statements from coaches and players with clear biases. It would provide a direct channel for explanation, however limited. The league fears this would create a star system among officials, or lead to damaging soundbites. In reality, it is a fear of losing absolute control over the messaging around the sport's most sensitive function. Structural changes to the replay system are also widely debated. The current model is a hybrid that satisfies no one. Proposals range from a full sky judge, a booth official with the power to correct clear and obvious errors in real time without a coach's challenge, to the radical simplification of reviewable plays. The sky judge concept aims to fix the most egregious errors, like the New Orleans non-call, within minutes, preventing an uncorrectable injustice. The league has experimented with a version of this in the command center, but its authority remains limited. Resistance comes from a philosophical commitment to the flow of the game and a reluctance to further slow the sport, though this is a poor excuse when the integrity of results is at stake. Simplifying review, making all penalties subject to challenge, or conversely, removing judgment calls from replay entirely, would at least create a coherent philosophy, rather than the current patchwork of what is and isn't reviewable, a system that itself feels arbitrary and unfair. Beneath these specific proposals lies a more profound potential for revolt. It simmers among the players, whose union has grown increasingly vocal about officiating. It brews among coaches, who now openly strategize around the perceived tendencies and weaknesses of specific crews. And it has reached a tipping point with a significant portion of the fan base, whose faith has evaporated. This revolt is not about forming a mob. It is about withdrawing consent. It is the growing belief that the outcomes are not legitimate, that the competition is compromised. This is an existential threat. A sports league sells authentic competition. If the product is perceived as inauthentic, the business model collapses. The league's response to these pressures has been to offer performative, piecemeal changes. A one-year pass interference review, minor tweaks to the targeting rule, while fiercely protecting the core architecture of secrecy and control. They treat the symptoms with aspirin while the patient suffers from a systemic infection. They believe the spectacle is too big to fail, that the public's addiction to the game will override its distrust of the referees. This may be a catastrophic miscalculation. The path to accountability is clear. It requires a genuine investment in officiating as a profession, a courageous commitment to transparency, and a structural willingness to cede some narrative control in exchange for restored credibility. It requires the league to view its officials not as disposable, problematic employees, but as the essential guardians of the league's most valuable asset, its integrity. The alternative is the continued, steady erosion we have documented, an erosion that leads not to a single breaking point, but to a gradual, fatal cynicism. The final question, then, is not about rules or technology, but about legacy. How will this era of officiating, defined by its secrecy, its controversies, and its crises of trust, be viewed in the harsh, unforgiving lens of history? What permanent marks will these years of confusion and doubt leave on the record books, and on our memory of the games themselves? History is the ultimate currency of the National Football League. It is traded in highlight reels and Hall of Fame speeches, etched into the record books, and woven into the identity of franchises and cities. We speak of dynasties, of legacies, of immortal performances frozen in time. The league's entire economy is built on the authenticity of this history. We must believe that the champions earned their crowns, that the records reflect true excellence, that the narratives of triumph and heartbreak are pure, unadulterated by external manipulation. But what happens when the very moments that forge this history are themselves contested? When the pivot point of a dynasty, the end of a contender's quest, is a decision made not by a player, but by an official. This batch confronts the unforgiving lens of history. It examines how officiating controversies do not fade with the final whistle. They calcify, attaching themselves permanently to legacies, staining historical records with a persistent, unanswerable question. In a league where history is everything, can we ever truly separate the champion from the call that helped crown them? The most profound example lives in the heart of the league's most celebrated dynasty. The New England Patriots' 20-year reign of 6 Super Bowl titles is the central architectural fact of modern NFL history. Its foundation is a single frozen night in Foxborough, the tuck rule game. Without that call, the Patriots' season likely ends in the divisional round. Without that call, the legend of Tom Brady may never find its launchpad. The dynasty's subsequent achievements, the breathtaking comebacks, the tactical genius, the sustained excellence are objectively real. They happened, but history is not just a list of events. It is a story of causation. The tuck rule is the original cause. It means that the entire towering edifice of the Patriots' legacy is built, in its first critical brick, upon an interpretation of an arcane rule that defied conventional football logic. For fans of the game, and particularly for the Raiders and their descendants, the Patriots' history will forever have an asterisk of origin, a ghost in the machine of their greatness. Tom Brady's legacy, the greatest of all time, is inextricably linked to a play where he was, by any intuitive measure, stripped of the football. History records a comeback victory. It struggles to record the profound ambiguity of its genesis. On the opposite end of the emotional spectrum is the legacy of the 2018 New Orleans Saints and their quarterback, Drew Brees. Brees' career is one of historic precision and resilience, a surefire Hall of Fame journey crowned with a Super Bowl victory. But his legacy, too, is now permanently bifurcated. There is the career he had, and there is the career he was denied. The non-call in the NFC Championship game didn't just cost the Saints a game. It likely cost them a Super Bowl appearance against a Rams team they had already beaten that season. It may have cost Brees a second championship, a distinction that would have elevated his historical standing in the endless, fraught debates about quarterback greatness. When history looks back at Brees, it will see the prolific passer, the beloved leader, the single title champion. But for those who witnessed it, and for the city of New Orleans, his story will also include the haunting, unrealized potential of what was taken from him on a play that never officially happened. His legacy is shadowed by a phantom. These catastrophic events are the mountaintops, but the landscape is littered with smaller, yet still historically significant fissures. The Music City Miracle in the 1999 playoffs, a lateral pass that was arguably a forward pass, propelled the Tennessee Titans to a Super Bowl appearance and ended the Buffalo Bills' last great era of contention. The Dez Bryant caught it non-catch in the 2014 divisional playoffs arguably altered the trajectory of the Dallas Cowboys' rebuilding efforts and the Green Bay Packers' path to the NFC Championship. The immaculate reception itself, the stuff of absolute football legend, is still debated by historians and purists regarding its legality. These moments are not footnotes. They are chapters. They determine who advances, whose season is immortalized, and whose season is relegated to a clip of despair on someone else's highlight reel. This presents an existential problem for the NFL's historical project. The league meticulously catalogs statistics, preserves films, and enshrines legends in Canton, all in service of building a coherent, authoritative history. Yet, at critical junctures, that history rests on a foundation of subjective judgment calls that a significant portion of the audience views as flawed or unjust. It creates two parallel histories. The official record, which is cold and factual, the Patriots won, the Rams advanced, and the emotional, contested memory, which lives in the hearts of fans and players and questions the very validity of those facts. The record book says one thing, The collective memory argues with it. For the individuals involved, this duality is a lifelong sentence. Raiders cornerback Charles Woodson, a Hall of Famer in his own right, is eternally remembered not just for his brilliance, but for the hit that caused the tuck rule fumble that wasn't. Rams cornerback nickel Roby Coleman will never be known for anything other than the hit that wasn't flagged. The officials themselves, Walt Coleman, Bill Vinovich's crew, are not remembered for decades of competent service, but as historical actors who, in a single moment, became the authors of someone else's legacy. They are prisoners of the unforgiving lens, their entire professional lives reduced to a few seconds of controversial tape. This is the ultimate power and the ultimate tragedy of officiating in the NFL. Its decisions are temporal, they happen in a split second, but their consequences are eternal. They write the stories we tell for generations. They decide whose statue gets built and whose heartbreak becomes folklore. They determine which cities celebrate parades and which cities nurse grievances for decades. The league operates as if the game and its officiating are separate entities, the glorious competition and the necessary maintenance. But history reveals they are fused. The blood, sweat, and strategy of the athletes provide the raw material, but the officials' judgments are the editors, deciding which plotlines survive and which are abruptly canceled. As we stand here, looking back at a century of football, we are forced to confront a disquieting truth. We cannot cleanly separate the sport from its controversies. The history of the NFL is not a pure chronicle of athletic merit. It is a palimpsest, a document where the original text of competition is overwritten, in certain indelible spots, by the shaky handwriting of human judgment. The championships are real. The trophies are physical. The tears of joy and anguish were authentic. But the paths to those moments were sometimes paved with decisions that remain, and will forever remain, open to debate. This is the legacy the current system has forged. A history that is simultaneously settled and endlessly argued. A canon of achievement forever shadowed by a canon of doubt. The final whistle, it turns out, is not an end, but the beginning of an eternal argument. We began in silence, the hollow echo after the crowd's fury has faded. We end in a different kind of quiet, the quiet of realization. This journey through the labyrinth of NFL officiating has not been a search for villains, though we have encountered pain. It has not been an expose of a conspiracy, though we have mapped the architecture of distrust. It has been an autopsy of a contradiction. The National Football League is a spectacle of controlled chaos, a celebration of human extremity, extreme strength, extreme speed, extreme strategy. And at the center of this multi-billion-dollar enterprise, we have placed a demand for something utterly opposed to that humanity, perfection. We have asked a group of men, endowed with all the familiar flaws of perception and nerve, to perform with robotic precision. We have taken a tradition built on split-second judgment and tried to subject it to the cold, unforgiving logic of a computer chip. The story of NFL officiating is, in its purest form, the story of the league itself. A breathtaking, brutal, and beautiful sport caught in a paralyzing struggle between its imperfect, human past and its desperate, technology-driven quest for a flawless future. The investigation has revealed a series of interconnected truths. First, the impossibility of the task. The speed of the game has long since surpassed the biological limits of the officials tasked with governing it. The rulebook is a well-intentioned fiction, an attempt to legislate for infinite variables that always produces new ambiguities. The pursuit of perfect consistency in the application of subjective rules is a philosophical fool's errand. Second, the consequence of secrecy. The league's fortress mentality, its belief that authority is preserved through opacity, has been its greatest self-inflicted wound. By hiding the grading, by shielding the process, by communicating in sterile, defensive statements, the NFL did not protect its officials or its credibility. It abandoned both to the wolves of public speculation. It created the very vacuum that conspiracy theories and corrosive cynicism rushed to fill. Third, the illusion of technological salvation. Replay and the looming promise of AI were embraced as panaceas, but they have only complicated the disease. They have shifted the debate from the field to the screen, from a real-time mistake to a slow-motion paradox. without restoring the vital, fragile commodity of trust. You cannot solve a human problem of credibility with a technological tool, especially when you wield that tool behind a curtain. We have felt the human cost of this contradiction, the isolation of the man in the stripe, who carries the weight of history and hatred home to his family, the anguish of the player whose legacy is forever bifurcated by a single whistle, the fury of the fan who feels the covenant of fair competition has been broken. These are not peripheral stories. They are the central emotional wreckage of the system's failure. The league, in its corporate calculus, often views these as externalities, the unfortunate byproducts of a massive entertainment product. But they are the product. The emotion is what is sold. When that emotion curdles from passionate investment into detached suspicion, the foundation cracks. So where does this leave us? The NFL stands at a precipice of its own making. It can continue on its current path, applying technological band-aids to systemic fractures, occasionally sacrificing a public-facing official to the outrage mob while preserving the secretive core of its operation. This is the path of managed decline, where the spectacle remains dazzling but the meaning behind it gradually empties out, where fans watch with a detached, ironic awareness that the competition may not be as authentic as it appears, or it can choose a harder, more revolutionary road. It can embrace a radical transparency, not as a public relations strategy, but as a philosophical principle. It can professionalize and empower its officiating core, treating them as partners in integrity rather than disposable, problematic employees. It can simplify its rulebook to prioritize clear, enforceable principles over legalese designed to litigate every possible scenario. It can accept publicly and humbly that human error is not a bug in the system of football, but a feature of its humanity, and then build a system that accounts for that error with grace and accountability, rather than denial and obfuscation. The price of the sport's staggering popularity is eternal scrutiny. The reward for embracing that scrutiny could be renewed legitimacy. This is not about achieving perfect fairness. That is a mirage. This is about constructing a system that is trustworthy in its handling of inevitable imperfection. It is about replacing the demand for perfect officials with a process that is perfectly honest. The whistle, that simple instrument of order, has never been more complex. It is now a symbol of a billion-dollar tension. It represents the last vestige of on-field human authority in a sport hurtling toward a digital future. The sound it makes still stops 70,000 people and millions more at home. But the faith in the decision it signals is fraying. The men who blow it are caught in the crossfire, tasked with an impossible guardianship. The game they oversee is a testament to incredible human achievement, yet its credibility rests on the thinnest reed of public belief. In the end, this is not just a story about football. It is a story about what we choose to believe in and what we demand from the institutions that ask for our faith. The NFL's darkness is not found in a shadowy conspiracy, but in the glaring, self-inflicted blindness to its own contradictions. The light, if it is to come, will not be from a new suite of cameras or a more powerful algorithm. It will be from the courage to lift the veil, to show the workings, to acknowledge the humanity at the heart of the machine, and to finally understand that the strength of the game has never lain in its pretended perfection, but in its resilient, enduring, and profoundly human struggle to be fair.